Good evening. We're so glad that you are here and joining us for our first opportunity to ask Betsy some questions and answers related to the maturity assessments that we've been doing through the newsletter. And tonight, our focus is on infant level maturity. And you are welcome to send your questions to me through chat. And I'll ask Betsy, and she'll give us the answers that we're all looking for. So tonight, I would like to start with the first question, Betsy. We want to know, how can I begin to recover from infant level maturity deficit?
Oh, that's such a great question. Well, my first thought is that we've really got to find something that is fairly easy, what we would call low-hanging fruit to start with. And the reason for this is if you can recover from a deficit that's fairly, I don't want to say it's simple, but within your reach, something that with some effort and time, you can begin to practice and get better at. If you recover from that, then you have more capacity to address a deficit that may be a little harder. And so you get the idea. It's similar to what Dave Ramsey calls the debt snowball, that things snowball in a good way. So initially you recover from something that's fairly easy, and then you take on something a little harder, a little harder, a little harder. And each time you recover, you have more capacity to tackle the next one. So what you really need to recover, you need awareness. You need to know, what you're up against so that you notice, oh, I'm doing this again. And sometimes it's as simple as just being able to stop and make a different choice. We also all need examples. So much of this should have been learned by example back when we were infants. And if our parents had that level of maturity, then they hopefully could give it to us. But if they didn't, we're not blaming them, but we're just saying we didn't have a good model. And maybe we didn't have a good model from anyone through the years that's helped us recover. So it's good to have a model. And it doesn't have to necessarily be someone who's more mature than you in every aspect. It could just be that they're more mature in an area where you're weak. So for example, a big area of weakness for me during most of my adult life was anger. I really would get stuck in anger and couldn't get out of it. And so what I needed then was to have a friendship with someone who was able to deal with anger. And I would watch them deal with difficult situations, and I would think, wow, they didn't get angry. Like, that's actually a possibility, to not get angry. And it helped sort of rewire my brain. So it's helpful to have someone with whom you can share life, just hang out with doing ordinary things, that is strong in the areas where you're weak.
So a follow on that, Betsy, would be, how would I find someone? Is it just someone in my life? What would I look for when I'm looking for someone?
It really honestly could be someone in your life. It very frequently is not someone in your family. I mean, often families will have similar maturity deficits because, they grew up around each other. And often if your parents don't have a skill, then you won't have it either. But one of the reasons we do leadership development groups is because it gives you an opportunity to connect with other people who are also trying to grow in this way. And we only meet once a month because we know leaders are busy, and we encourage our leaders to invite someone out to lunch, have someone over, go walking with someone, get to know other people and share life with them. And so over time, hopefully you can find people who are strong in the areas where you're weak. And it's a funny thing. There was a study done some years ago where they put families that they considered to be at risk, and they paired them up with families that they thought were strong. And what they found over time is both families became more healthy. So you think that maybe the weaker person is going to drag you down, but I think for the stronger families, it gave them an opportunity to think about, what are we doing here and how are we doing this right? And so it actually strengthened the strong families, and it also helped the weak families. So there's just a need that all of us have to be in community and to have relationships with other people, to not isolate, and instead to connect with other people and let yourself connect deeply. And of course, that takes time. You don't bond to someone right away, but if you can begin just reaching out in the way that you would like to be reached out to, and getting to know people and spending time with them, that can help.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you. So we have a question that is, what is the correlation between infancy deficit and the ability to hear God?
Wow. I don't know. I think one thing that really characterizes not all, but many infancy deficits is the inability to regulate your emotions. And in fact, Alan Shore, who's the, famous psychiatrist, this guy, he says that the primary task of childhood is to learn to regulate your emotions. And of course, if we look around us, we can see many adults who can't regulate their emotions. But I don't know if it's correlative with hearing God, because I think the Lord is near to the brokenhearted. And when I think about myself, I had poorly regulated emotions and would have, complete meltdowns at times. And I remember I would go up to my room and just throw myself on the bed and I would cry really hard. But then as I was coming out of that time of just weeping before God, I would often hear him. There was something about, as my body and heart quieted, I would hear him. So that was a really sweet time when I would hear from God. But it wasn't until about 10 years ago when I learned the Emmanuel method that I knew that there were things I could do to initiate hearing from God. Prior to that, it was sort of a random thing. I'd be in the shower, in the car, I would have just been crying and I would hear from God. And he would speak to me. With Emmanuel, I learned that I could quiet my body, focus on a positive memory, so that I was activating my prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that hears from God. And I learned that I could hear from him more often. And then it's just become easier and easier. But I think probably we're all made as believers to hear from God. I just think we don't always recognize that it's him. We think it's just a random thought and we just push it away. So I think everyone can hear from God, no matter what their maturity. That's my thought.
Great, thank you. Another question that we had is based on one of the first assessment questions, was joy is my normal state and I'm strengthened by joy. These seem like two separate things to me, but my question is about that first sentence. I truly don't even see how joy as a normal state is even possible in this world. It just feels like a constant battle. Return to joy makes much more sense to me. Any thoughts?
I think we are born with zero, like no ability to regulate our own emotions. And we're pretty fearful, like a baby. If you lower your hands very suddenly when you're holding them, they'll completely startle. So I think the fear response is sort of the normal response. But as time goes on and they're cared for well, they begin to trust their primary caregiver. It doesn't happen quickly. It happens over the first 2 years of life and then continues on. And so it's by someone being there for them, meeting their needs, loving them, helping them calm down when they're upset. And so I think what happens is there's a kind of a transition where your default, your baseline, your normal state hopefully moves from being fearful to being trusting and being secure and being joyful. And I remember seeing that with my kids, when they were really, really tiny. I breastfed all three of them. They would literally be crying as they were latching on, and they would be like starting to suck and still be crying. And then they would finally recognize that milk was hitting their stomach and they would calm down. But as they got older and older, when they, by the time they could pull themselves to standing in the crib, they would see me come in the door in the middle of the night after they'd been crying, and they would immediately stop crying, even though nothing had actually changed. Do you know what I mean? They still were hungry. They still didn't have milk in their stomach, but, and I could pick them up and I could carry them, and I could even like get myself a glass of water. But if I did anything more than that, if I exceeded their limit, then they would start to cry again, and then it was harder to comfort them. So there's a trust relationship that goes on. And hopefully if we have secure attachment and we've learned during those crucial first years, 2 years, how to trust, then joy actually will be our normal state. And I'll tell you that one person I really see that in is my youngest daughter. You know, by the time I had the third kid, and she's 10 years younger than her older sister, I think I got to be better at meeting her needs. And she just became like a really positive person. And she's still a really positive person. And she's almost always really happy and excited about life. And to me, it's kind of a miracle because I have a tendency to be fearful. So I think that's what they're talking about, is joy is my normal state. In other words, I've had either a secure attachment as a child that has grown, or I've developed as an adult a secure attachment to God, to where I really trust at a very deep core level that my needs will be met. And so that's basically that's like my baseline. That's where I am. It's almost like, I think the normal temperature for a human being is like 98.6. That's where it's supposed to be. And if it's high or low, something's wrong. Well, you want ideally that baseline emotionally to be joy. That's where I am. When I wake up in the morning, I'm in joy. Return to joy. I mean, I think even if you have a secure attachment, hard things will happen in life and you will need to return to joy. But so it's not saying that will always continuously be in joy, but it's saying that is easy to return to, and that you're internally, emotionally grounded in a place of joy. Your expectations from life, things are going to go well. I'm going to be loved. I think my husband had that too. His mom was incredible. She somehow managed to spoil 8 children, but she had a full-time maid. I think that helped. I think mothers need a lot of support.
Wow, that's a hopeful answer, Betsy. And so here's something that kind of corresponds a little bit with that idea of the return to joy. Is there, in returning to joy, is that the same as shutting down my emotions?
Oh, no. So the life model people use the term return to joy. And I mean, that's a good term, but I think maybe it's because I'm a scientist, but Alan Shore's word is regulating your emotions. And I think maybe that's a better word, because joy is a high energy state and shalom is a low energy state. And when I think of regulating your emotions, I think of like metabolizing what you're feeling and being able to come to a place of tranquility, if that makes any sense. You can't live in a high energy state all the time. I think a lot of people don't understand that. And they're literally going, trying to keep themselves in a high energy state. Because when they're not in a high energy state, they drop way down and then they feel horrible. And that's, I think, one reason some people have trouble with being still and quieting is because their expectation is, I should be in this high energy state, and they wear themselves out. So no, it's not shutting down. And I think I mentioned to you the window of tolerance. I don't know if you brought that with you, but that's a good thing for us to look at. So nice to have someone else doing the screen share. Okay, so this is the window of tolerance, and on my screen it's coming out really big, so I'm gonna click for options and make it 50% so I can actually see the whole thing. And it's basically, the window is that beautiful picture in the middle that looks like you're at the beach. And it's basically, you know, different size window for different people and different times, different moods. And so what happens is you have a window of tolerance. So if things happen within that tolerance, things in terms of their intensity and the duration, how long do they go on? Like, how long you stress, maybe you can handle it for a certain amount of time, or it gets even stronger. So that's your window where everything, you're able to handle it, you're able to regulate it, it works pretty well. So what happens is stress and trauma will shrink that window. It could be a temporary thing, like you've had an overwhelming afternoon and you feel your window of tolerance shrinking, and you're not then able to handle as much. And obviously getting healing prayer or therapy can also help you process the things that are shrinking your window and help your window to become bigger. But typically people, their dominant way of reacting to things outside their window of tolerance is one of two ways. So the top one, they become hyper aroused, they become anxious, angry, out of control, overwhelmed, and your body wants to fight or run away. And it's not something you choose. These reactions just take over. And they show you a volcano. I have to tell you, as a geologist, very badly drawn volcano. None of them are that steep, but we'll let that go. And then the bottom one is the hypoarousal. And that's where you tend to become spacey, zoned out, numb, frozen, and your body just wants to shut down. And once again, it's not something that you consciously choose. It's a reaction that just takes over. So in my marriage, I'm definitely the hyper arousal person. So if something happens, like a car accident on my street, I'm out the door running, trying to help triage. I like run toward problems, and Sam will go numb. And for many, many decades in our marriage, I didn't understand that. And I would think, how come when we need him most, he suddenly just gets the blank look on his face and isn't there for us? But I know now that once again, it's not something he's chosen. So I know many people, when they get overwhelmed, they space out. So I think it's something you have not chosen to do, and that is not the same as regulating your emotions. Regulating your emotions is a healthy processing. I remember when Sam was at Johns Hopkins getting his bone marrow transplant, and sometimes we would hear news that was sort of concerning in the clinic. We had to walk from the apartment that was on campus at Johns Hopkins over to the clinic every day, and we would get news that was difficult. But then we were practicing a lot of appreciation, which was really helpful. As we would walk back, one of us would say, well, gosh, wasn't the nurse nice today? And wasn't the doctor nice? And don't you feel well cared for? And aren't they doing a great job keeping us informed? We would start thinking about all these positive things. And that would expand our window of tolerance. And all of a sudden, the bad news didn't seem so bad. We felt like the Lord's with us. He's going to bring us through. This is going to be okay. And so there are things you can learn to do to help your window of tolerance. Like one thing is to know that you're not alone. So if something rough happens and you call a friend who hopefully knows to listen empathetically and not try to fix you. And, just the act of not being alone can expand your window of tolerance. Practicing appreciation can help it. And as you mature, you just find that you have more capacity, you have more tolerance. So thank you for that, Christina. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think so. So thank you for that. So another question we have is about the assessment itself, the infant maturity assessment. And when we are looking at answering those assessment questions, are we thinking about what we were then at that age, or are we thinking about what we are now? What view do we take as we answer that assessment?
Yeah, those are intended to be done by adults. And so you're looking at where you are now. And I kind of touched on this a little bit before we started, but you can recover all along the way. Someone can recover without even knowing what the problem is. You can have relationships as an adult that are very nourishing, and they help you recover, and you don't even you don't even know it's happening. When I was a single mom, I moved to Virginia for the first time to do some research in a lab, in an isotope lab here. And I had my little 2-year-old in tow, and I was befriended by this incredible family from Mississippi who I think the Lord just gave them a love for me and my daughter. I asked them one time, like, why are you so nice to me? And they were like, we just love you and little Anna. It was the cutest. But I had a lot of epiphanies during the year and a half that I was here because of their tender and kind love. I remember realizing at one point that I was wanting emotional intimacy, and that I had, not to be graphic, but I'd been like trading sex for love my whole life from 18 on, and that I didn't have to do that, that it was actually quite satisfying to be in a very close relationship with a group of people who treated me as if I belonged to them, as if I was part of their family. And I'm still like really close with them. They moved back to Mississippi and they're very elderly, but so God can bring people into our lives and relationships into our lives. Sam had a very secure attachment. I did not. And so him being so secure, has over 35 years of marriage. I'm dominantly secure now in my attachment. So we're looking, you may have recovered. So it's, where are you now? Are you able to regulate all the emotions now? Or there's some of them you get stuck in? Are you able to receive? Are you able to rest? Or do you always have to go and do? So those are the kind of things we're looking for. We're looking for, what do I still need to work on?
When we're looking at the things that we're working on, should we just dive all the way in? What should it look like as we're in that recovery path? Did we pick one thing to focus on at a time? What words of advice do you
have? I would really recommend one thing at a time. So I just chose one thing to work on, and it wasn't the thing I would have most loved to jettison. I mean, the anger was such a big issue. I don't think I couldn't have started there. I do remember, I think the first time I did it, I just chose one thing, and I chose it in the childhood part, which wasn't as big an issue for me, but the infant part just felt too overwhelming for me at the time. So I chose, it was about how to go and explain yourself to someone who doesn't understand you, like to persevere in trying to make yourself understood. And I was on staff at a church at the time. The Healing Center was just a few years old, and it was growing pretty rapidly. And there was a priest, not the main rector, but one of the associates, who pretty regularly in staff meeting would say that the Healing Center was taking over the church, and be pretty unhappy about it. And it would really trigger me. So I would leave the meeting. I'd go back to my office where Cheryl Collins, who was such an incredible partner for me in establishing the ministry, where she was sitting. I would get her to do prayer ministry with me, so I was no longer upset. And then while I was still calm and in my window of tolerance, I would march down to this guy's office and knock on the door and say, hey, can we talk about something that happened in staff meeting today? You said that we were trying to take over the church, and I just really want you to know that that's not my heart. I think everyone needs healing, but we're not trying to make the whole church about healing. I know people are healed to do something they're called to do, and that could be lots of things. And I would talk to him, and he would be like, oh yeah, I appreciate you coming down, and it would all be great. And then maybe a couple of weeks later, something similar would happen. But the key was, I learned to get untriggered first. Like, don't go down and try to address it while you're, while you're really upset, because that usually won't go well. And I just would go in and try to explain where we were. That was really a learning experience for me, because prior to the assessment, I didn't think that was my job. I thought if people didn't understand me, that they were being jerks. And, I was going to write them off. I didn't think it was my job to explain to them, what they didn't get. I remember reading that thinking, how can that be a childhood task? Show me any child that's able to do that. Of course, now I've been around a lot more children and I see lots of kids who will stop and say, no, I didn't say that. I said this. I know I don't want this. I want that. And so lots of kids are able to do that, but I was not. So you do one thing at a time and you try to choose something that you think is actually doable. So sometimes that might mean that you're actually decently strong in that area, but you haven't really mastered it. So maybe a good place to start is I'm pretty good at returning to joy from sadness. And so I'm pretty good at that one. And so I'm just going to work on really paying attention to where I'm sad and bringing it to the Lord and releasing my sadness to him. Just going to really, really work on that, because if I can master that, and if that becomes something that's almost automatic for me, then once again, it's going to give me more capacity to address some of the harder ones. So you really want to pick what is my easiest one, and ask the Lord, where should I start? And then over time, you want to start tackling. And when I say over time, this is not something that, in 1 year, I'm going to go from 0 to 60. It's not going to happen in 1 year. It takes some time. So I've been doing this for probably 10 years, but more intentionally, I would say the last 5. And this last year, when we do it every year in leadership development, we just assess. And that's probably one of the most sweet things, is when you reassess a year later, you see, oh, I really have improved. Like, we'll use the same form, but maybe a different color ink, and you put a date up there, and you start to see, wow, I'm really growing, I'm really improving. There's something so powerful in knowing what you're up against. And so you see improvement. Yeah. And then you tackle another one. So just this last year, for the first time, I said, okay, I'm ready. I think I'm gonna look at returning to joy from shame. And shame was such a big deal for me. It was such a big deal that I didn't even admit that I was feeling it. I sort of thought in my mind, oh, shame's not a problem for me. And then all of a sudden, when I started realizing it was like, oh my goodness, this is like such a big problem that I can't even look at it. And now I'll recognize, oh, I'm feeling shame. And it's almost like, as soon as I say that's what it is, and I just then give my permission to feel that shame and to acknowledge, wow, I'm not happy. I'm not proud of myself for what I did. Sometimes I need to contact the person and make amends and apologize, and then give it to the Lord. It's when I said, I think it was in November, that I was going to start looking at shame, I just thought, oh, this is going to be like really a horrible experience. But it really hasn't turned out to be a horrible experience. It almost seems like as soon as you acknowledge that's what you're feeling, then it subsides to some extent.
That sounds like a lot of good news. Thank you. We have a few more questions that have come in, and I'll remind you, if you have a question for Betsy that hasn't been addressed yet, or something she said has provoked a question that you think, oh, I want to know about that too, go ahead and send that to me in a chat, and I'll make sure that Betsy gets that question. So we have another question here that says, please explain the relationship between maturity levels and attachment styles. I guess maturity drives your attachment style?
I mean, in general, your attachment style is set during the first 2 years of life. And then, of course, it can change, either for the good, or, someone who grew up with a very secure attachment can end up in an absolutely horrible relationship that tears them down. But attachment styles do not change very easily. So I'm trying to think. I haven't thought of this before. Can you be fully mature and have insecure attachment? Probably not. I think that's one I need to think about. I can see where they're kind of related, but in some ways, I wonder if the attachment style is much more related to infant maturity than the other levels, because that's where it forms, based on your mother or primary caregiver's response to you. So secure is your mom meets your needs over and over again until you have a security that my needs are going to be met. You have an expectation. And it doesn't, she doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, no moms are perfect. I think I saw studies somewhere where it's like if she's good 50% of the time, you'll have a secure attachment. And then the insecure styles, the worst kind, disorganized, is where you actually feared your primary caregiver. So sometimes they helped you and sometimes they didn't. And that usually is from a mother who's drug addicted or mentally ill herself. So I would think it would be really hard to have solid infant maturity. If you grew up with a disorganized attachment, you probably would have a terrible time regulating your emotions. And you might be a lot like I was, because I had a dad who was just very volatile and often angry. So of course we didn't learn how to regulate our emotions from him. And then distracted is where mom or your primary caregiver is often very attentive and loving, and you experience that and you think, oh, relationships are wonderful. And then at other times she's not paying attention at all. So you don't know what to expect. So because of that, your attachment light in your brain will be always on, because relationships feel good, but they're scarce. And so you're always looking for relationships. You're always looking for someone to connect with. And then the last insecure kind is called dismissive. And that's where this is kind of a sad one, because often it comes when moms or primary caregivers don't recognize that babies actually need relationship. They need someone to mimic their facial expressions and their voice tones and make eye contact with them. And so you'll see moms, they just think their baby's not, until they start talking. There's no actual interaction that's going on. And so they'll just like physically take care of them. And those kids often grow up to be sort of loners, and it'll be the little boy playing with his train in the corner all day. And the mom will say, I never have any trouble with Johnny. He never asks for anything. He's just very compliant. But in reality, Johnny is hungry for a relationship, but he's learned that they're not a source of joy. So Johnny will become a workaholic, or he'll find some other source of satisfaction in life than relationships. So I'd have to think through. So if you're dismissive and you don't really pay attention to emotions, and you don't really see relationships as a source of joy, it seems like that would be really hard to fully mature. And I suspect a dismissive person would probably be what they call the airplane that's flying upside down, where they have really good childhood maturity, like they know how to do hard things, that kind of stuff, but they don't have any of the infant stuff. They don't know how to receive or connect emotionally. So I think disorganized attachment is really a painful thing. And I suspect that most people who have disorganized attachment probably really struggle with infant maturity. Now, having said that, whenever I talk about attachment, I feel like everybody gets really, really worried because they think all of us have a little bit of things. And so don't assume the worst. In your case, the best thing to do is go online and find, one of the free attachment inventories where they ask you a bunch of questions. And we've lately been using one by Diane Poole. And the reason I like that is a lot of them plot it on a rectangle. And if you plot like not in a corner, so the 4 corners are secure and then the 3 different kinds of insecure, if you plot out here, you don't actually know what pulled you out. whereas Diane does a circle and it has a pie thing. And so the last time I did one for me, it's probably been about a year ago or maybe more, I was really happy because I was very clearly mostly secure, but I still had like 17% disorganized. Not surprising given my background. I think I had 17% distracted, and then I had surprisingly a little bit of dismissive. So I suspect that most of us are that way, that we're mostly secure, but these other elements are there. And it's, it's just good to be aware of, because in hard situations or with certain people who bring out the worst in you, you may find yourself sliding into insecure behaviors. And really, I think the best solution for that is to spend time with the Lord. Like have long Emmanuel times. I've been having a kind of an ongoing Emmanuel time with the Lord for the last month or so, maybe longer, where I'm being held by the Father and I'm little and he just is looking into my eyes. And, that's how a baby forms secure attachment. And so we can all go nestle up in the lap of God and let our hearts attach to him. That was a really long answer, but I was kind of thinking as I went.
That was really good, Betsy. And there was one quick aspect of that I'm going to follow up on, and then we'll move back to a couple other questions that have been posted. So regarding the attachment styles, and I think I heard you at least hint at this, but maybe you can be more explicit in it, which is, can you change your attachment style?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my attachment styles dramatically changed.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, we have another question. I have a friend who says she was born with anxiety. How do I gently address this with her?
Well, I don't know. It's in some ways it's not our issue to fix anyone else. So, and I find often when people try to fix each other, it often turns off the relational circuits of the person being, quote, fixed, and then they're not open at all. So I would just say love them, be their friend, attune to them. Don't worry about fixing them, let God fix them.
And so if we think about
they could have been born with anxiety, I guess. I mean, babies in the womb do feel their emotions around them. And maybe they were born with anxiety and the mom didn't know how to help them. I mean, children need help coming out of where they are. And it's interesting. My little, I won't say who it is, but I was with a family the first night they came home brought their little newborn baby home from the hospital. And I was in the guest room. I could hear the baby crying almost the entire night. And I didn't want to interfere, but I came out at some point in the wee hours of the morning. And the father was holding the baby, had taken all the baby's clothes off except for the diaper, had some pretty happy but loud music playing. Oh, well-meaning new parents. And they, I just said, would you like me to take the baby? And they said, yes, I would love for you to take the baby. And then they left and they said, do you mind if I go to bed? I said, no, go ahead and go to bed. So I looked at this poor little baby. Her mouth was like a perfect circle and her little tongue was like this little line inside going, nee. And I just said, I know what you need. And I took her into her room and found a blanket and I swaddled her really tight. And then I just held her and did the little, movement and just kept saying, like, oh, I hear it. And she then started to, kind of shake, how they do because they've been crying so much. And I had the lights out, I turned the music off. I just helped her quiet, like I knew how to do from years of experience with my own 3 kids. And she quieted down and went to sleep. So then I didn't want to leave her. So I just put her in a little papoose next to me on the sofa, and I went and got a book and sat there and read. Well, they came out, both mom and dad, after a while and said, "Oh, she's asleep. What'd you do?" And then they went back to bed. So then that gave me opportunity to give them a little lesson on what newborns need. And there's a really great book called The Happiest Baby on the Block that should be required reading for all brand new parents. And it's basically on how to quiet a baby. It talks about swaddling. And so why did I tell you that? I don't even remember. What was the question again?
I think it was about helping other people, and sometimes they just don't know.
Well, I think my thought was that she could have been born anxious, and that the people in her life didn't have the skill to know how to calm her down. So if you don't know how to calm down yourself, it may be very hard for you to calm down a baby who's crying. And so, I mean, that could be true. But I wonder, is she saying it's hopeless? I can't ever change. This is all I've ever known. I mean, that would be a very hard place to be in.
Is there anything that we can do to help others who have identified their own areas of deficits, that we can come alongside them? Is there anything you would recommend for
If
that?
it's an area where we're strong, we can share stories with them. We can spend time with them.
And could you clarify the difference between telling a story and giving advice?
Oh, that's a good question. So giving advice is you are telling me about a situation in your life, and then I tell you what I think you should do. Which in my experience, very often the person has already thought of that and it doesn't apply for some reason. I mean, people spend a lot of time thinking about their own problems, and so often our suggestions don't apply. And it's exhausting to have to explain to 10 people in a row why what they're suggesting isn't going to work, or that you've already tried that. It's just exhausting. So telling a story, I mean, ideally, you always want to listen first. And, you know, we teach a class, Listening for Heaven's Sake. It's not a class we developed. It's a class that was developed by Equipping Ministries International. They're in Cincinnati, and they teach classes regularly. So if we're not offering it, you can go there and take it from them. That's where we learned it. But the most important thing, I think, is to just listen and receive people where they are, and just love them where they are, and not try to fix them. But there is something else you can do that's not really fixing people. It's learning to tell return to joy stories, which Frank Williams just did a great job teaching everyone how to do that at our retreat. And we also have a little description of it in our workbook, Living Relationally. It tells you how to tell a return to joy story. So return to joy story is taught in less than like 2 or 3 minutes. They know that's about how long people will listen to you. They don't want to listen to you more than 2 or 3 minutes. And it has certain elements. It starts in some area of pain, which you define, and you define how that felt in your body so that people themselves feel it, and it activates that part of their brain where, say, they feel sadness. And then you tell a story how you were able to regulate that sadness and return to joy. So there's certain elements that you want to have in the story because you're trying to activate the same neural pathways in the people around you and have them return to joy. So I'm trying to think if I can come up with one impromptu. I used to have one that I would tell at Thrive, where I decided at the age of 50 to take up ballet. I don't know what I was thinking, but my very first class, I pulled something in my back and then couldn't come for 6 weeks, but I finally came back, and it was just super hard for me. Not the most graceful person in the world, but I persevered. But I found myself all the time feeling shame over the fact that I was having such a hard time learning how to do ballet. And to try to cover my shame, I would tell them things that there was no reason to tell them, like that I had a PhD at Stanford and stuff. Just trying to make them see that I was not such a loser. And I felt a lot of shame, like I was less than because I couldn't do this. And they, of course, most of them had all been in the class for a long time and they were pretty good. But over time, I actually learned how to do ballet pretty well until I sprained my ankle a couple years ago and had to give it up. But it was really sweet over time to actually master a difficult task like that and to enjoy the beauty and the grace of doing ballet. So that's not a very good job because I didn't describe like how it felt in my body and all the other things. But the beauty about returning to joy stories is that you can tell them all the time and no one knows what you're doing. So you can tell them at dinner parties. I used to teach high school. I would tell them to my high school students. And it makes you unbelievably popular because people like to feel joy. And you're telling them a story where they feel the painful emotion, but then they feel the happiness, the joy. And so that feels good. So I noticed I had people tell us, we always invite you and Sam to dinner parties because you guys have such great stories. So the key was not too long, start with a specific negative emotion, always end with a really happy ending. That's probably why we all like movies with happy endings.
That's a skill I want to practice. So thank you for sharing about that. Betsy, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how we can interact with Jesus and his role in recovery from deficits.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because the life model people say that maturity is something that we have to do, like we as human beings have to do the hard work to say, I'm going to notice this and recover. But I definitely feel that when it comes to emotional regulation and our need to receive comfort from someone else who isn't overwhelmed by that emotion, that Jesus is such a powerful person. Number one, he's always available. Number two, he's always happy to be with us. I mean, he never says, oh man, this is too much for me. He has unlimited capacity. And the best way that I know to practice that is to learn the Emmanuel method. It's pretty easy. You try to quiet your body through deep breathing, yawning. You pray a prayer for protection. You focus on a positive memory, or if you have a memory of a previous divine encounter where you were interacting with the Lord, you go back and focus on that. Try to remember as many details as possible. You can express appreciation to the Lord. If you don't see him, you can invite him in. If he seems far away, you can ask him what's in the way. Sometimes we have beliefs that he's not safe or not kind, that he can dispel. And I'm not saying, it happens overnight, but you can start to practice this. We do it every day at Daily Connects. You can come to Daily Connect and people will lead you through. And you're developing an interactive relationship with God so that you're able to go to him and interact with him. That doesn't mean when you're really upset that you might not need help. Because sometimes when we're really upset, we need another person to help us go to God and connect, because the relational circuits, the front part of our brain, is shut off and we need someone to be with us. But I've been practicing Emmanuel now for probably about 11 years. And I have a little YouTube video. It's on our website, I think under free resources, or you can just Google my last name, Stalcup, and then Emmanuel spelled with an I, and you'll know you're at the right one. It has a picture of the Grand Canyon because that's what I used for my appreciation moment. I had one couple tell me that they've watched that video over 100 times. So it's a good way to practice. And yeah, I think developing a close relationship with the Lord, where it's an actual relationship, where conversation happens, comfort happens, is absolutely crucial. And I think especially with the infant maturity, because so much of that has to do with regulating emotions. And the Lord really is able to comfort us and give us his perspective. A lot of times when we're hurting emotionally, there's a tendency for us to amplify what's happening and for it to take on a much bigger size than it is in reality. And the Lord can calm us down and help us to see things the way he does from his perspective. So that's, I think, a really, really important thing to do. Now, my dream is that people will get to be really good in the manual, and they'll have like partners that they get together with every week or every other week, and they practice with each other. Because when I was learning, my friend Cheryl and I, we started doing that. I think we actually met every other week, and we would alternate who is the facilitator and who is the recipient, and we would do a manual with each other. It was either every week or every other week. We did that for years. It just really helped build a solid basis. But now we have Daily Connect, so that's another option.
We do. So I'm going to put in the chat box the web address. Oh, someone was just asked about that Emmanuel video and said they found it online. So you can find that on YouTube that Betsy mentioned by searching her last name. Also, Healing Center International has their own channel on YouTube, and I believe it's on there. And you can find it at our website and more information on the Daily Connect that Betsy's referencing. If you go to godhealstoday.org is our web address. So Betsy, and we have time for probably if someone else wants to shoot a quick question. I have one more question prepared here, but feel free to shoot me another question if you would like. So the last question I have is, how am I going to know that I have recovered from a deficit?
That's such a good question. Yeah, you just find you have a different perspective on things. That is so funny that you brought that up, because Sam and I were talking about that very thing today at lunch. And so not to spill any beans, but he's giving a bit of his story in our July newsletter, which is coming out incredibly late. We've been a little busy, but and if you're not on our newsletter mailing list, make sure you go to the website and sign up for it, because I have to say, we put a lot of effort into our newsletters trying to give our community things that will be very helpful. But we were talking about the shift in our perspective as we've matured. So I realized, this is just today, this happened, that when I was really thoroughly stuck in infant maturity, I mean, really badly stuck. It wasn't just a few things. It was like almost everything. When I was upset and having a meltdown, it just seemed obvious to me that everyone, the world should stop and everyone should help me. And as I matured, I realized that, I was feeling pretty intense emotions, that it might overwhelm some of my friends, and that maybe I needed to go to God or someone I knew who had really good capacity, and not be so pushy and demanding, but to say like, hey, I'm really struggling. Do you have a moment? And sometimes they would say, well, I can't right now, but I could later on this afternoon at 3. Would that work? And I would say, that's fabulous. But earlier, when I was really stuck, it just felt like people were being cruel to not help me immediately. And my emotions were so intense. I think a lot of my friends felt kind of trapped by it, like, oh no, here she goes. And, if we don't help her, she's going to totally. And I realized my earlier point of view, it was the point of view of an infant. When an infant is crying and upset, the world better stop and help me. And so I literally had the mindset of an infant. And as I've gotten older and more mature, I have a different mindset now. I have a mindset that says, I'm really upset now, but it's not the end of the world. Help. I'll get help one way or another sometime in the next week. And God is with me. And this is my problem. I'm responsible for this really intense emotion I'm feeling. Even if it was triggered by someone who hurt me or said something mean or whatever, I feel now that I was triggered. I was the one who was triggered, and I I now need to get help, and that it actually is not the responsibility or fault of the person who upset me. They were just the trigger. This actually is much deeper than that, goes way back to childhood. And the people who did this to me originally are now in heaven, thank God. They're not responsible either. So I think what it is your perspective changes. And so, not to spill any beans, but we were talking about how Sam had this incredible avoidance of doing anything hard. And so all of the really hard things were left to me. And our neighbors in California would joke about it. They would call out to Sam, "Your wife's up on the roof again? Like, how come she's up there?" Or, "Your wife's crawling on her belly under the crawl space." Like, where are you? I mean, they would like give him a really hard time. So I asked him, back when that was happening, did you feel guilty about that? And he kind of thought, and he said, "No, I really didn't." We realized that for him, he was stuck in a childhood frame of mind. And a child, is expecting mom to take care of the hard stuff. And so I was the mother figure. And I did it because I just couldn't stand having it not done. But what's happened, we've both matured, and we've gotten a lot of help with codependency, another great topic for the future. And what happened is I've gotten to where I just let it ride. So I used to really care about the house being perfect. So, he had a bird feeder that went awry and got wet, and the seed sprouted and smelled terrible. And at any rate, he's left everything just sitting, not the stinky seed that got tossed, but he got new seed, and he cleaned everything out, and it's just been sitting there by the deck door. And I've been just letting it sit there. So it's been a huge change in our marriage. I'm not whooshing in to fix things that I know are clearly his responsibility. And he now knows this is my responsibility. And he's no longer avoiding hard things. He'll say, "That's been sitting there for a while. I need to take care of that." And then he took care of it the other day. He filled up the bird feeder, got the bucket going again that now has been cleaned out. So we both have had this huge perspective shift. So if I did something now that is clearly his responsibility, then he is grateful, and it feels unexpected to him, and he knows it was his. Whereas, and we're talking about, we've been married for 34 years. So we're talking about things that happened a long time ago, back when we were living in California, which has been more than 30 years ago, where he was perfectly happy to let me do everything that was hard. And it didn't, I asked him, "Did it bother you?" And he's like, "No, it didn't bother me at all back then." So how do you know you've recovered? Your perspective shifts.
Thank you. So we have really enjoyed having these questions that Betsy's answered, and the time that Betsy spent answering these questions. Betsy, we're actually at 7:31. So if you want to take a moment and just wrap up, if there's anything else you think that you'd like to say about infant maturity, and then I'll stop the recording, and anyone who wants to come on camera and just say hi and thank you can certainly do that in just a moment. So Betsy, anything last you'd like to say, or would you like to close us in prayer?
Sure, I'd like to close in prayer. So, Lord Jesus, we are so grateful that you are fully mature in every possible way, and that you really do know the way. And Lord, you know that our maturity deficits cause pain for those around us, and Lord, also for us, when we watch other people do things so easily that we know are a struggle. And so I pray for each person here that you would just give us a hopeful vision of what you want us to tackle and how to begin, that you would provide all the resources we need. And Lord, that we would be really gentle and very patient with ourselves, and know that, when we're children, these stages last many years, and that they don't take as long when you're an adult. But even so, this is not something that happens quickly. So Lord, give us the perseverance and the ability to stay on the path, even when we screw up, Lord, to just forgive ourselves and to just keep moving forward, Lord, and to not give up. And Father, I pray for each person here that you would give them a fresh revelation of how very dear they are to you and how much you love them and the wonderful plans that you are preparing for them to walk out. And Lord, that our immaturity does not in any way diminish your love for us or the value that you place on us or your delight in us, that you are committed to us and that you will see us through. We just thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.